We are gathered here today to remember those who have passed on. British Home Stores, Toys R Us, Maplin, Pound World, Woolworths, Comet, Church of England.
Hello, and welcome to the show. Colourful conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark. This week we ask the big question: why are big businesses going bust? Well, as we heard at the beginning of the show, some very big brands have gone bust. But why is this? Is it just simply that they're all falling on hard times due to the fact that the retailers and some of the manufacturers are seeing that consumers have less money in their pocket? Is it something else? Is it due to the fact that when you get to a certain size, it's difficult to operate in the 21st century? Has now the time come that big businesses perhaps are no longer really ready for this type of business today? Is it that now that the small business manager and the medium-sized businesses are the ones that we're all looking for to pave the way going forward? Well, there are some other issues. Some of them, sadly, have gone bust due to corrupt actions. Yes, we've seen recently that news such as Petite Valerie has struggled recently because they've just run out of cash. But what's also been discovered is there's been some financial fraud. And whilst the investigations still continue, why is it that many businesses that get very big suffer from this problem? In fact, just one giant step too far, which does actually lead to a big question. So I'm going to raise a little point here, and it's in the thought of a little poem. One giant slump for mankind. There once was a corporate giant that was loved by Wall Street and all, upon which the city was reliant, and shareholders had a ball. It stood sturdy and defiant, until one day there came a call. Their traders had been non-compliant, so the business started to stall. As the regulation wasn't so pliant, the racing market slumped to a crawl, and the firm was no longer a supergiant when the writing was on the wall. Leaders looked humble and suppliant as they took a tumultuous fiscal fall, but now they've lost every client and become extremely small. So, Clergyman Pete, what is going on with big today?
Yes, well, Businessman Mark, I think one of the things that we're seeing is these the companies, big companies, are not too big to fail, as it used to be said. Certainly about the banks. I mean, there's obviously a big gap somewhere. It may not be one reason, of course. It could be a whole collection of different trends, but certainly we're seeing a big increase, aren't we, in the number of big companies failing? I'm thinking of that big construction company, Carillion. Now they failed, didn't they? At the turn of end of 2017, start of 2018, they were going into bankruptcy. That affected me, in that I'm driving past the hospital that they're supposed to be, the new hospital they're meant to be building in the centre of Liverpool. They've taken over half the street with their construction work, and then just left it because they went bust. So there's something going wrong there. If you see some work just left unfinished like that, down tools, you're gone, that means something sudden happened. And so I suppose before we go on to all the various reasons, you mentioned one to do with corruption being prevalent in the larger businesses, especially. I know you've got a point about that, but the first thing to notice is that whatever is behind all these big brands falling away, it's something that they themselves, or at least the leadership, don't seem to be aware of, in that it's catching them unawares. They don't seem to have, in general, made plans.
They're out of touch. They're becoming out of touch.
Yeah,
yes.
So it's snuck up on them. So I know that obviously a lot of major leaders in the business world listen to the Mark and Pete show. So this could be very useful for them. I think this could be we'd be able to point it out to them. I mean, look, it's surprising to me that But less so as they get older and older. But it seems to me that in every area of life, of an enterprise, including, it seems, in big business, when you actually look into it, most people are pretty useless. I don't know what. There's a
That's
few,
your observation of our commercial leaders.
No,
today.
just life. Well, you go when you see a particular job. Say you go to a hospital. There's lots of doctors. You, if you're going into the emergency, you look around to say, now there's always one competent one, and he's the one who looks tired. Where is he? And you try and find him. And it seems to me it's the same in almost every sphere. And in big businesses, I guess there'll be some people who are in touch, and they're the ones who are going to succeed. Maybe some people are lucky, but at this level, it takes more than luck, doesn't it? You've got to have long-term planning. You've got to have got to be rigorous in your application of regulations, and you've got to be flexible.
Well, I have a view on this. You mentioned,
So let's talk about that.
Well, I think that the problem here is that big businesses get to a size where, on the one hand, they can offer some great value because they have an international footprint, and as a result, they've got good insights to what's going on into different markets, and that is important because you need to be able to adapt. But the trouble is it gets so unwieldy that operationally it can become difficult to react and change and adapt. We're in a world where things need to move fast. The technology is fueling that to one extent, and consumer demand is another. So, for example, the consumer wants better quality, they want it for quickly, and they want it for the right value. Now, in order to do that, you've got to be able to set up quickly. You've got to have the right supply chain in place. You've also got to have the right leadership in place, but you've also got to have the right skills in place throughout the whole operation. And what we've seen is that some of those brands that you mentioned at the beginning of the show just simply haven't adapted. For example, some of them just haven't moved, like the retailers, have just stayed to a traditional high street model and haven't moved to an online model where they've got other options to provide consumer services, which really would maintain their businesses longer term. And they just simply haven't adapted. They haven't quickly moved with the times. There are other companies, sadly, and some of them are still in existence, but it's been widely reported that big companies such as Tesco's have suffered because some leaders have been non-compliant. They've basically committed financial fraud and they've not reported cash flow correctly, and that's a serious issue as well. Now, I'm not saying that small businesses and medium-sized businesses are not guilty of this. But the challenge that we're seeing, and this is why it seems like month in, month out, that some of the big businesses are going bust, is that I think that the traditional boardroom that you would see at the top of the tree that are running businesses have a disconnect between the rest of their operation and, most importantly, what their customers really want. And as a result, there is tremendous pressure on those individuals to deliver results, particularly short term, especially the quoted companies, those who are open to the markets and people can buy and sell shares. Quarter by quarter, you have to deliver results. You have to improve. You have to show that the business is moving on. But the problem there is that sometimes that changes behavior. And as a result, as we've seen, some people compromise. They either compromise standard, in some cases being non-compliant, but worse still is that what they do is that they drive the business short term and they're prepared to cut their cloth and sacrifice the long-term quality, which means that they're not able to then sustain their businesses long term. Carillion was an interesting one because one of the things that they weren't doing is they weren't paying their suppliers. So as a model, what was happening is they were getting themselves into some pretty sort of difficult cash flow issues. And as a result, they were able to trade within their own business quite well. But unfortunately, their supplier base suddenly said, no, we couldn't survive anymore, because if you don't pay your suppliers, then ultimately that's going to affect the business. So we're seeing different things happen to big businesses. Why is it that those big businesses that we've seen in previous centuries have survived for longer periods? Simply because they took a longer term strategy. Their whole business model was a little bit more dynamic, and I think they were much more in touch with their customer. And I think that's one of the issues that we're seeing.
Yes, I think that there are those issues in play. But I do see with the very big companies that the leadership in them tend to be out of touch with, I suppose, the world at large. In some cases, it means they've lost touch with their customer base. Let's take, for example, the sort of tech companies and the social media companies. They tend to take a very left-wing political position. Now, in fact, different to most of the listeners to our show. Not all, I hope, but certainly most of the listeners to our show would be more right-wing. If you're centrist, you're more right-wing than most of these large companies like Google and if you would take Facebook and Twitter, and I suppose Twitter's not quite as big a company, but they're really out of touch, and they take a hit because of their taking on particular social position. And for companies that aren't quite as big, the hit can be significant. Well, and I think what this shows, though, is that they're out of touch. They're in their own little bubble, their own little world, and so I think that is contributing towards their problems. And if you take companies like a company like Disney, which protects its brand so carefully, but what it's protecting its brand against is is against its sort of family friendly image, and yet it's building up trouble for itself, because within that family friendly image it's included certain types of sexual perversion that we've talked about on the show as being part of that. So for example, they were claiming that it was great they had their first gay moment in a song in one of their recent cartoons. Now, they haven't quite gone the full, what we would call, social justice warrior, taking on every single social issue that's going, but they could be in trouble if they go further that way. Even Disney, I would say, is not too big to fail.
Oh, absolutely. And coming back to one of the points that you mentioned, you touched upon some of the social media giants. Yeah. There is something else where their business model hasn't adapted. So, for example, when they first set up, it was all about providing the channel, the platform for people to communicate. And that was great. But the one thing that they didn't do, and it's been widely discussed, but again, it illustrates the point, when data compliance being so important to consumers and their customers today was ignored and in some cases exploited, and still today hasn't been fully addressed, that's where the big giants are losing touch. Not just some of the points that you've raised on a social front, but on a compliance point of view. Yes, sure. The fact is that the General Data Protection Regulation that's been put in place, the famous GDPR, that's now active across Europe, meaning that citizens today within Europe, and irrespective of the Brexit situation, folks, that whether we're in or out of Europe, United Kingdom still applies to the same rules. The point is that you have a right now as a citizen to protect your data and a right to be forgotten. And so therefore it means that consumers have a right to ensure that the customers that they're sort of seeing, they're those big trading organizations, small, they trade with their data, i.e. give their data away for goods, or that they choose to relinquish their data. It means they're doing it on trust, in the sense that those companies will manage their data, secure their data, and if the consumer wants to leave and break the relationship, they now have the right to say, delete me. I wish to be forgotten. And unfortunately, some of the big social media giants just simply haven't adapted. And we're seeing more and more of these cases come up where actually the likes of Facebook and Google and Amazon as well have all been guilty of either perhaps misusing data or perhaps not protecting the data. Sure, and so that this does apply, as we know, to small and medium-sized companies. So let's please get that straight. However, I think many companies over the last 6 to 12 months have been scrambling to say all areas of the business to try and make themselves data compliant.
Yeah, sure.
And I still think that there are big giants in the social media arena that needs to rethink their model, because at the moment it's not working.
Well, I mean, Google, the biggest of them, just cut out its own social media site completely. Google Plus, as we speak, is being dismantled.
Yes.
And that's the reason that they had discovered some possible data breach. They didn't mention it at the time because they didn't want to be drawn in. It was about the same time that Facebook got caught out, and so a few months ago. So they kept it quiet. So they cared, but not enough to tell anyone. So, right. But they've closed down because, of course, I think they
careful PR there.
Well, there's an interesting thing. One is they realised that they could be liable for some,
of course,
some legal challenges. Yes. But also there is the point that 95% of the use of Google Plus was for under 5 seconds. Yep. Which is if you use it by accident. So they were out of touch. It's this is both two of our points together. I suppose we're making 3 points behind why this is happening. Why big brands, big companies are going down. One is them not doing long-term planning, which has been a problem for a bit. Them being not being compliant with regulations and thus making themselves liable to legal challenge, and third, that they're out of touch, and that brings two of them together with Google Plus, the Google Plus situation. They're out of touch. That type of social media where you bully people into joining, which was basically their model. You've got to join this if you want to use YouTube, for example. It doesn't work, doesn't endear you to people. And then they were lax with their security. So that's just one example, though, isn't it, of how the companies are not being able to keep up with the changes in society, whilst appearing to think that they're forerunners. Some of these companies, and I think some of these big companies with very now rich people ahead of them, they could well be heading for a fall. One of them could be next.
Well, indeed. Now, listeners, what do you think?
Space.
Do you believe that there will be some big name brands that will disappear off the high street or possibly off the financial markets? Who do you think's next? Well, I'd love to hear from you. Clergyman Pete, I know, will have his own opinions on this. So why not log on to markandpete.com and actually tell us what you think? Which brands do you think will be the next in line? Maybe you've got some interesting insights that you think that we should know about and report about on this subject. So join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark.